China's space program just had a really bad day, and it's raising questions about the next chapter of the global space race. For years, Beijing has told a story of smooth, constant progress, launch after launch going right, with the promise of catching up to SpaceX. But in mid-January 2026, that image took a hit. Two different rockets from two different launch sites, both failed within about 12 hours of each other. You could chalk it up to bad luck, or you could see it as a window into how China's system really works when it collides with hard engineering. Two failures, one story. In mid-January 2026, China lost two rockets in a single day. One was the Long March 3B, a veteran workhorse that's carried many of China's most important satellites, like the Atlas and Delta rockets did for the US. The other was Series 2, a brand new rocket from a private startup called Galactic Energy, one of the leading players in China's SpaceX-style commercial space push. For years, Chinese officials have pushed these startups to copy parts of the SpaceX model. Cheaper launches, faster turnaround, more commercial customers. But there's a catch. You can copy hardware, you can't copy culture. And when you rush, physics doesn't care about the 5-year plan. When old reliable fails. Let's start with the Long March 3B. It's one of China's main workhorse rockets, flying for decades and used for high-value government and commercial missions. The company behind it is CASC, China's state-owned aerospace giant. Basically, they're all-in-one NASA-Boeing ULA hybrid under direct party-state control. In mid-January, just before 1 a.m. Beijing time, a Long March 3B lifted off from Xichang, a major inland launch site in Sichuan, essentially China's Cape Canaveral in the mountains. On board was Shijian-32, officially a technology test satellite, part of a series China uses to try out new space tech, often with fuzzy public descriptions. The first and second stages worked, but something went wrong during the upper stage phase. The rocket failed to place the satellite into its planned orbit, and the mission was declared a failure. On paper, the Long March 3B is still a solid rocket. It has an overall success rate well above 90%, comparable to America's classic workhorse launchers over their full history. But when you've been selling unbroken success for years, even one high-profile failure with a government satellite punches a hole in the narrative. The point isn't China can't build rockets. It's even the safest part of the system isn't bulletproof. The SpaceX-style startup hits a wall. Now the new guy, Series 2. A few hours after the Long March failure, China tried again, this time with a shiny startup rocket instead of the old state workhorse. Series 2 is built by a Beijing company called Galactic Energy, basically a scrappier, smaller SpaceX trying to move up from its earlier, smaller rocket. China has gone big on this new space push, with hundreds of startups and a cluster of rocket firms in Beijing nicknamed Rocket Street. Series 2 is roughly a 100-ton launcher meant to carry a bit over a ton of small satellites. On its very first flight, it was carrying a batch of paying customers' hardware. It lifted off just after lunch, climbed, then something went wrong. The rocket came back down in an empty area, and every satellite was lost. Rockets blowing up on their first flight isn't unusual. Early US, Soviet, and even SpaceX rockets did that. The real difference is what failure means. For SpaceX, an explosion is data and content. In China, engineers know space is hard, but politics hate public failure. So Galactic Energy apologized and promised an investigation. But behind that statement, they're answering to a system where their main customer, regulator, and political boss are basically the same authority. Tofu dreg logic in a rocket factory. So why should two failures in one day worry anyone beyond the space nerd crowd? Because they fit a pattern you see all over China's economy, a clash between political incentives and long-term quality. On paper, China's built a new space ecosystem. Commercial companies backed by state money, local governments, and national policy, something that looks a bit like Silicon Valley from far away. In practice, these firms still operate inside a Leninist party state, where what gets rewarded is visible success. More launches, new rockets, big announcements. Quiet reliability and boring safety margins don't win promotions. Chinese people even have a term for the ugly side of that logic: tofu dreg projects. It describes bridges, schools, and apartment blocks that look fine outside but are rushed, underbuilt, or corruptly done underneath. The phrase really took off after the 2008 Sichuan earthquake, when flimsy school buildings collapsed and were blamed on corner cutting. The pattern is simple. Officials are judged on growth and flashy projects, not on whether something quietly lasts for 50 years, so the system tilts toward speed and good enough. Space is far more demanding than a local bridge. but the incentives rhyme. Officials want launches on schedule so they can claim progress. Companies want to keep those officials happy to secure the next contract or funding. Bad news and delays are politically dangerous, so there's always a temptation to smooth over problems instead of flagging them early. That's tofu dreg thinking in a rocket factory. Not that the rocket is literally made of tofu, but that the deeper rule is, hit the numbers, make it look good, and deal with the rest later. Layer on top the foreign tech squeeze. For decades, U.S. export controls have limited China's access to key space and satellite technologies, pushing it to build more of its own hardware. In the last few years, Washington has tightened controls on advanced chips and chip-making tools, trying to slow China's military and AI progress. Beijing's answer is a massive self-reliance drive, ripping out foreign suppliers and swapping in domestic ones as fast as possible. We don't have evidence that those export controls directly caused these two failures. Investigators are focused on specific technical faults inside each rocket. But zoomed out, you see a country trying to rebuild big chunks of its tech stack under huge time and ideological pressure. The party wants to prove that its model, socialism with Chinese characteristics, can stand on its own and beat the West. That leaves China's space sector pulled in three directions at once: the unforgiving physics of rocketry, the commercial urge to move fast, and a political system that prizes control, speed, and face over open, messy trial and error. The Long March failure shows even the old state backbone isn't immune. The Series 2 failure shows the new private disruptors are still trying to find their balance on that same tilted floor. Why any of this hits you? If you're watching from the US or Europe, this isn't just a China story. It's about risk in the global tech you rely on. First, the money. Space insurance and project finance run on stats. 2 failures in a single day from the same country force insurers and satellite operators to adjust their risk models, especially for those rockets. That can mean higher premiums or tougher terms. And if you're choosing between Chinese launchers and options in the US, Europe, or India, this becomes one more reason to ask, how much risk are you taking to save on price? Second, satellites are invisible infrastructure. GPS, shipping, aviation, weather, farming, broadband. Huge parts of that depend on getting hardware into orbit on time. When a major launcher has problems, some satellite projects get delayed and costs creep up, and that can eventually show up in shipping, internet pricing, and even parts of your portfolio. Third, this is a snapshot of China's economic model in transition. Beijing wants to move from world's factory to innovation superpower, and commercial space is one of its showcase industries. One bad day doesn't end that project. China still has a space station and successful lunar and Mars missions, but it does expose the core tension. A communist party that wants tight control and fast wins, colliding with an engineering reality that punishes shortcuts and spin. 2 rockets, 1 country, 1 very rough day. These failures don't erase China's progress in space, but they expose the cracks that appear when a political system built on control, speed, and image tries to run cutting-edge, high-risk industries at full throttle. And for everyone else, they're a reminder that no space power, China, the US, anyone, gets a pass from physics. Reliability isn't guaranteed by ideology or slogans. It's earned, slowly, one launch at a time.